This episode of Safe and Sound is part of our Summer Safety series. Each episode focuses on different challenges that arise mostly in the summer months. We speak with people impacted by these challenges and learn how the divisions within the Department of Public Safety help protect and support Ohioans. In this episode, DPS Director Andy Wilson speaks with Sima Merick, Executive Director of the Ohio Emergency Management Agency, and retired Ohio State Highway Patrol Major Gary Allen, who survived the tornado that devastated Xenia in April of 1974.
My parents covered me, shielding my body from flying bricks, shattered glass, and other debris. The deafening wind sounded like a team of fighter jets hovering above. It was the sound of devastation. In between my sobs, I could hear my dad praying to God for our protection. I looked down the hallway and saw the bedroom doors slamming against the wall before ripping away from their hinges. The roof tore away and the walls around us crumbled. It was 4:40 p.m. That is when a tornado packing a 318-mile-per-hour wind splintered neighborhoods, reduced schools and businesses to piles of rubble, shredded graceful Victorians like paper dollhouses, and ripped apart historic landmarks that had stood for more than a century. April 3rd, 1974 was one of the most violent single-day tornado outbreaks ever to strike North America. Known as Black Wednesday, this system caused 4,148 twisters across 13 states, killed more than 300 people, injured nearly 6,000 others, and resulted in about $500 million in property damage. Xenia, Ohio was the hardest hit of all. That was an account of the 1974 Xenia tornado by author Jeff Louderback, who was 5 years old when he and his family survived the tornado. I'm Andy Wilson, Director of the Ohio Department of Public Safety. Welcome to the Safe and Sound podcast, where we discuss real-life stories of safety and survival and how first responders and public safety officials work incredibly hard to keep you, your families, and your community safe. Here in Ohio, March starts tornado season for us. And that's not just in Ohio, it's across the entire Midwest. And in Ohio specifically, we believe tornado season runs basically March, really kind of through late fall. We've seen some late fall tornadoes here the last few years. And today I'm joined by two very special guests who have experiences both in living through a tornado and responding to the aftermath of tornado events. They're going to share some of their experiences with us today, and again, we're so incredibly happy or thankful that they're willing to give us some of their time. First, we have Gary Allen, a Xenia native who was a young man when the tornado hit his community back in 1974. Gary, hello. Welcome to the Safe and Sound podcast.
Hello, Director. Thanks for the invitation.
We also have with us today Sima Merick. Sima is the Director of the Ohio Emergency Management Agency. The Ohio Emergency Management Agency is the division of the Ohio Department of Public Safety that interacts with Ohioans on often what is their worst day. The Ohio Emergency Management Agency responds to and helps people recover from both natural and man-made disasters. Sima, hello, and welcome to the Safe and Sound podcast.
Morning, Director. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, listen, we're going to jump right in. And actually, we're going to jump in with you, Gary. Again, we're so thankful to have you on the podcast this morning. Tell us a little bit about yourself. So where are you from? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Tell us about your family growing up.
Yes, sir. I grew up in Xenia, Ohio. I was born in Springfield. I lived in Xenia until I was 19 years old, and I joined the United States Army, and I never went back. I joined the Highway Patrol in 1989 as a member of the 118th Academy class. I stayed with the Highway Patrol for a total of 32 years, had a great career, probably the best thing I ever did, along with joining the Army. Currently, I'm the Director of Security for the Ohio Industrial Commission. I'm married, have two sons, and spend a lot of time doing things that I just didn't have time to do before.
Hey, that's the story we hear about retirement all the time. Let's actually go back to your childhood in Xenia. So when you grew up in Xenia, who all lived in the household? You have siblings, mom and dad live in the household. Tell us a little bit about your family life.
Well, I could start with, 1974. I had an older sister. She's 11 years older than me, so she was married at this time. She got married right out of high school. So I lived with mom and dad and my little brother, Tony. Growing up in Xenia, it was a typical small town. It was just a typical small town. Everybody knew each other. When you got out of school, sometime you went home, sometime you went to somebody's house, but nobody worried where you were. So everything was really peaceful and calm up until that point.
So back in 1974, when the tornado hit, and we're going to talk specifically about your experience with the tornado, it was you, mom, dad, and you said little brother Tony?
Yes.
And how old was Tony? Well, first of all, how old were you, and then how old was Tony?
I was 9, and Tony was 4.
Okay.
Yeah, he was 4.
So did your dad have a job where he worked first shift? So mom worked during the day, dad worked during the day, you went to school, and Tony went with mom?
Yeah, I went, dad worked, I think he was working at a paper company at the time, around Dayton area. And then Tony would go with mom, and then I went to school. And, back then I went to Shawnee School, and you could walk to school, even though it was probably 2 miles away.
The good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. You walked to school, and then you walked home with a group of friends.
Right. Talk a little bit about the Xenia tornado. I think a lot of folks may not realize just the gravity or severity of that tornado with respect to some of the storms that we see these days. So going back to April 3rd, 1974, the Xenia tornado was an F5. It was categorized as an F5, and we'll talk in a few minutes to Sima about exactly what that means. But that specific tornado had winds that were clocked at over 300 miles an hour. The tornado itself traveled about 52 miles an hour, up to 52 miles an hour as it moved across Greene County and across the state. The funnel width for the specific tornado that hit Xenia was measured at approximately 1,000 yards. So that gives you some scope of how massive this storm was. It left a path of destruction that was 16 miles long. In total, not just the immediate destruction with the storm, but in the days afterwards, there were 35 people killed as a result of the storm. That includes 2 guardsmen who died in a fire 3 days later, just working in response and in recovery to the storm there in Xenia. Over 1,150 people were injured as a result of the storm there in Xenia. 1,098 homes destroyed, and there in the Greene County area, they suffered $95 million in damages. So obviously, just one of the most catastrophic storms that we've ever seen here in Ohio. So 1974, you actually were on the ground in the center of this tornado as it struck your hometown there. How old were you in 1974?
9. I was 9 years old.
Okay. And do you have, as we sit here, do you have a pretty good recollection of the storm and of what happened that day?
Yes, sir. Yeah. I think it's one of those things you never forget.
Right.
Because it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing.
So what do you remember? So how did you first become aware that something was happening or something bad was going on?
I was, as I said earlier, I was home. And by that time, Mom and Tony were home. So I was watching television, and we had it was a news break. The weatherman, Gil Whitney. Now, they didn't have Doppler radars back then. They just had that one radar. But I guess he identified it because it was as a hook cloud, as what they called it. And he told us that it was coming in our direction. So me and Tony go outside, and we're looking. We don't see anything. It's still pretty decent outside. It's getting cloudy, but it's pretty decent. And Mom comes out, and she says, "But she said, there's a tornado coming." I say, "Yeah." Well, Mom, she tells me later, she really underestimated it because she grew up in Louisiana, and she used to pick cotton when she was a kid. And she said there was nothing to see tornadoes because they were, Oklahoma, Texas, all of that. They had tornadoes in Louisiana. So Mom said, we never really did anything except lay down. And so we're out there. Everybody on the street's out there. Everybody lives on the street. It's out there looking for this funnel cloud. And then we see it. And it's downtown, and it's coming east. And from the west, and we're just like, man, that's a really nasty looking cloud. It looks like a thunderstorm cloud, but it's on the ground. It's close. So we run back in the house and get under the bed, and Mom starts praying, And then you get that noise, that freight train noise. It's like a jet's on the ground or something. I mean, it was a crazy noise. And I hear one glass crack, and it just, and we stayed there until we didn't hear anything. And we didn't have any damage to our house, but 2 houses over, they were damaged. This place was really, really damaged. And they ended up tearing it down.
So tell us about you have a basement in the house?
No, we didn't have a basement, and so we just got under the bed.
So prior to this storm, had you had any training? Or I remember when I was a kid, we'd go to school and they would tell you what to do. We'd have tornado drills.
Right.
Everybody goes out in the hall. You basically sit on the floor. Everybody sits shoulder to shoulder on the floor, up against a wall. You put your head between your knees. I don't know if my kids even still do that these days, but back before the Xenia tornado, do you remember having any of that training? Do you remember doing that?
I don't remember doing it up until that point. Now, we did it a lot afterwards. It was a monthly occurrence afterwards. But up to that point, I don't remember ever doing it.
Okay. So when you hear tornado and you go outside to look, do you have any idea what's coming your way, or can your 9-year-old mind at all grasp? Clearly, you're standing outside, so you don't grasp the dangerousness of the situation, but...
And that's the funny part, because I didn't. I had no idea what we were going into. I knew it was a severe storm, but I just thought, well, it's going to be like a thunderstorm.
Right.
And we had a covered porch, and we would always sit on the porch when it would rain, because we just liked the rain. And so I'm thinking, is that bad? But as you see it, and it's off in the distance, then you realize, man, this is really bad, and everybody's outside. And so everybody knows that it's really bad. So we just run back in the house and get under the bed.
Was there a point where you said that a lot of your neighbors were out, everybody was out kind of looking at it, watching it come. Was there a point when like everybody started panicking or running or screaming or anything like that signaled to you as a 9-year-old, like, oh boy, we're in trouble?
Yeah, they were standing out, and everybody was, you could tell they were way more concerned than it was with the thunderstorm. Mm-hmm. They knew that there was, like, man, this is a really bad storm. And like I said, the weatherman, Gil Whitney was awesome. Because they had no way of knowing if he wouldn't have identified that. So, he was one of those weathermen that if he said something, you believed him.
Right.
Because,
right.
He was the guy.
Right.
So you believed everything he said. And everybody's kind of looking around and they're talking to each other. The adults are talking. I'm not saying anything. And then Mom says, okay, we better go in the house and get under the bed. Okay. And then I knew something bad, because we never got under the bed during a thunderstorm.
Right.
So I knew something was going on.
So you, mom, brother actually get under the bed. And then
yes.
you say you hear the storm coming, you hear breaking glass, you hear the tornado coming. You hear breaking glass, and you give the classic, it sounds like a freight train. Everybody you talk to who has lived through a tornado, that's pretty much how they describe it, as a freight train. Do you remember what you were feeling, what you were thinking? At some point, were you just like, oh boy, this is this is serious, we could get hurt? Or could you even again, at 9 years old,
yeah,
a lot of times you can't wrap your mind around it.
I did. I was able to understand that, man, this is bad, and you're thinking, am I going to die? Because it's an experience, and it's catastrophic, something that you never experienced before, and everybody's concerned. The weatherman's telling you that it's really bad. Mom has you under the bed, and mom's praying. So I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be really, really bad.
Right.
And we were just blessed that it wasn't as bad as it could have been. Right. It was for some people.
And you said your house didn't sustain too much damage.
No, we didn't. It was that one window.
Okay.
It wasn't even a window. We had a door. It was like a storm door. It had 8 little, probably 8 by 10 planes, pieces of glass in it, and one of those cracked out, just completely was out on the ground. But the other 7 were intact. And so, it could have been from the door slamming back and forth or something like that, or or pressure or whatever it was. But that was really it. But there was a lot of damage and destruction around us, behind us. It was hit and miss.
And that's what I was going to ask. So walk us through. You walk outside, you see that your house is still standing. Very fortunate, obviously. But as you look around your neighborhood, where you grow up, the area where you play, describe what you're seeing.
Yeah, so the house next door was there. That was there. And I remember there were some trees down in the back. The house directly behind us, it's just, the roof is gone. I mean, it's just beat up. They ended up, because I remember they built a brand new house. And we used to go in there and look and see what they were doing. And they built a brand new house. And but the house next to that was completely intact, except for a tree down in the backyard. So after we get out and venture a little bit, then you realize the destruction that's just hit and miss all over the city, especially in downtown Xenia. And that was the next day, the following day.
Right. Now, are your neighbors starting to come out? How are people like carrying themselves? What's the emergency response? Are you seeing fire and police starting to come into the neighborhood? Walk us through what's going on there.
Yeah. So you're hearing sirens. You're hearing a lot of sirens, and like I said, it kind of reminds you of what a war zone would be like. Because there's a lot of excitement. The street is clear where we live up to a point. Maybe a mile down the street, it's not clear, but it's clear up where we live. So we see a lot of first responders going down through town because we live on Main Street, and and like I said, like 4 blocks away is downtown. The neighbors are there, and I remember our neighbor had 6 kids, and all the kids were there. And we're all out there talking to each other, just kind of discussing what we saw or what we heard, and everybody's okay. That was the main thing. Everybody's kind of walking around, making sure everybody's okay, because the aftermath of the storm, nothing happened, right? It just kind of got quiet, and everybody's outside in disbelief. You just can't believe what we just went through,
right?
And it's just really kind of shocking. The weirdest part was the next day, when we were able to go out and kind of look out and research what happened.
So before we get to the next day, there's a missing piece of the story that we haven't talked about. Your dad.
Right.
You talked about your mom, yourself, your brother hiding under the bed. Where's your dad, and how does he make it through this?
Well, my dad, right? I got to tell you, my dad's a different kind of guy. He's John Wayne, Audie Murphy, Chuck Norris tough, So he's coming home, and he knows about this tornado. He's on his way home. And so he gets to a point where he can't drive any longer because there's stuff on the road, and he can't get there. So he runs to some houses, and he tries to get in, and no one lets him in.
Oh.
And the tornado's coming. It's not even coming in his direction. I mean, it's not where he is right at the time, but it's been there. So He doesn't know what's happening. So he's knocking on the door. No one lets him in. He ends up laying on the ground in a ditch. And he said, and all of that stuff happened right around him. He said it never got him, but he said, but he could see the whole thing and stuff flying around. And actually, one of the houses where he was laying in the ditch, I mean, I'm picturing this in my mind's eye. This house was destroyed, and nothing happened to him. And then he ended up running home. So he gets there, I don't know, probably 45 minutes after everything happens. He has to run home because he can't drive home.
Because the roads are just too destroyed?
Yeah, there's stuff all over the roads, the debris. And so his car, because I think his car stayed there for several days.
Oh, wow.
Until they clean the road. And he runs home. So that was such a relief, because that was the first thing I thought. It's like, man, where's Dad?
Mm-hmm.
But it's strange, because part of me just thinks, he's okay. Because I'm 9, and I've never seen nothing happen to Dad.
Right, he's Chuck Norris in your head.
Yeah.
The problem back then too is you don't have cell phones.
No.
And I'm sure the telephone lines were down.
Right.
You probably couldn't call anyone. So that had to be, even though again in your mind your dad's Chuck Norris and he's invincible. I bet in your mom's mind she was like, oh, where's he at?
Yeah, and she, like Mom, she just calm.
Right.
She just like. She doesn't mention it or anything, and then I see him, and I was like, man, he made it.
Man.
So
that had to be such a relief. That had to be such
it was
a relief. So what a fascinating story as far as him having to actually get down in a ditch. I always wonder, and I want to ask some of this at some point, but when I'm driving and there's a storm coming, and this actually happened to me maybe 2 years ago. I was driving back from a meeting that I had up in Port Clinton. I'm driving through Hardin County, and my phone is going off. The warning system's going on my phone. It's like, tornadoes headed your way, tornadoes. And I could see these really black clouds, and I'm like, oh, man, I'm driving in the middle of an area that I don't know that well. And if I see a funnel cloud popped out, I was humming, just trying to beat the cloud because I could see. I knew where the storm system was, and if it made it a little further south, I knew I was going to be out of it. So I'm humming along, trying to get out of that storm system. But I'm starting wargaming in my head. I'm like, hey, look, if a funnel cloud drops out of that dark sky, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Part of me is like, do I just sit in the car and ride it out? Do I try to get under a bridge? So we're coming to you to answer some of those questions for us, but to hear your dad have to actually live that in probably the biggest tornado to hit Ohio in recorded history,
right.
And that he jumped down a ditch and literally just held on and rode it out is a fascinating story. So walk us through the days after. You talked about once you were able to kind of get out and go downtown Xenia. What do you remember? What stands out to you about that?
What stood out is I got lost. And I remember it was some friends of mine, some guys that live across the street. We were all around the same age. And we go downtown on our bicycles as far as we could go, because you could get a lot farther on a bicycle than a car. So we're just kind of looking at everything, and there's a lot of people downtown because there was some looting, because there were jewelry stores and there were all kind of stores downtown, small businesses, and there were just a lot of people down there. And I knew that people were down there looting, and the law enforcement presence down there was pretty thick, and they're telling you go home. Right. You kids don't need to be down here. You kids need to go home. And I always tell everybody, my first interaction with a state trooper, because I saw a state trooper, and he's the one who told us, like, you kids need to go home, And but the funny part was we didn't know where we were going because the landmarks were there, some of them, and then you had to see what you could identify and get back, and that was really probably the most confusing part of the whole thing. But there was a Kroger's right next to a railroad tracks. And there was the trains. I don't remember how many and how many cars were on the train, but the train had flipped over multiple times right on top of this Kroger, and the Kroger was destroyed. And the thing was about the days after, if you went down in that Kroger, man, I've never seen so many rats.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And it was just, rats were everywhere because it was downtown and it was destroyed. And I remember that so well. The number of rats you would see, like, I guess it's like what New York City has, and rats everywhere.
That is interesting.
Yeah,
that's
because
interesting.
it was just so much open, exposed food. And so over time, you would see dogs, rats. You see all kind of animals down there just eating some of that food that was out of those grocery stores. And because we would go down there, and my friend had a BB gun, and he would just call it ratting. He'd say, I'm going to go ratting. And he would just like to go shoot rats. Yeah. We're talking, this is Xenia. That's fun. Yeah. So
the animals were looting. So, and one of the things that stands out to me in the story, and again, is just we talk about how different times are back then and as compared to now is, and my parents would have been the same way. I mean, we used to get on our bikes and just ride all over the place. You're talking the day or the days after tornado where there's debris everywhere, and you and your buddies just hop on the bikes and kind of go exploring. Yeah. So that's what an interesting perspective. And again, what's interesting is this is the town that you grew up in. This is the town that you play in all the time in areas that you're very familiar with, and it's so destroyed that you get confused as to where you actually are because there's no reference points or landmarks that you can recognize. Right. Just utter destruction.
And the thing, as far as Xenia is concerned, I'm not sure how. I'm not sure Xenia ever really completely recovered from that because a lot of people left, and it was one of those things, but it was a lot of pride there. And the motto became Xenia Lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I still have a Xenia Lives bumper sticker. Everybody put it on their cars, because they were determined to come back, because it was a really resilient community at that time. In a weird way, it brought people together a lot.
Right.
I mean, it really did. I mean, it was a close-knit community anyway, but everybody was willing to help everybody else.
Right. And again, I think Sima can speak to that a little bit. I think a lot of times in these tragedies or in these disasters, it's very traumatic and there's a lot of trauma and pain associated with it, but a lot of times it drives that community to be stronger, to come out the backside stronger. Not only that, it drives the surrounding communities to come in and support. And again, Sim and I spent a lot of time up in East Palestine earlier this year. I mean, there were people from all over the state just bringing in water and supplies, and I'm sure it's the same way in Xenia. In a lot of ways, these disasters really bring out the best of humanity. Unfortunately, there's a lot of times where we won't even talk to our neighbors, wave at our neighbors, say hi to our neighbors, just in normal life.
Right.
But then if there's a tragedy, we're bringing them water, we're trying to help them out. So it's unfortunate that it takes a tragedy to bring out the best in humanity. But I think when you step back and actually have the opportunity to observe it sometimes, you do get to see the better part of people. So I'm glad to hear that was part of your experience as well. So listen, Gary, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. We certainly want to talk a little bit about the emergency management side of tornadoes. This is tornado season, and we are public safety, so we want to talk about what happens from the public safety side when a tragedy or disaster like this strikes a community like yours. So we're very, very fortunate to have with us today Sima Merick, who, as I said earlier, is the director of the Ohio Emergency Management Agency. And Sima, I talked a little bit about tornado season, trying to pin down exactly when it is here in Ohio, and we think it starts right around March. It's when really kind of temperatures start changing. Mm-hmm. Typically, I think when I was a kid, it would go through September-ish, October-ish, but we were talking before the podcast that some of the worst tornadoes, some of the more active tornado systems that you're seeing actually are going into the November timeframe. Mm-hmm. So if you could take a few minutes, tell us about, first of all, tell us about EMA. Tell us what you do at EMA, what EMA does, and then tell us about tornado season here in Ohio with respect to when people should be preparing or watching out for tornadoes.
Sure. Thanks, Director. So the emergency management space is the space that works on preparedness and helping people understand events and activities and hazards that they should prepare for. So, share a little bit. I have a bunch of nieces, and one of them said, as emergency management director, do you have a preparedness kit? And I was like, kinda, which made me think about that I didn't really have that kit completely put together. So we do a lot of messaging, we do communication, we work on preparedness, we do exercises. We move into then, of course, our operational footprint. That is where we are coordinating and communicating with all the agencies, departments, and stakeholders that would help those people on their worst day, right? After a tornado, a train derailment, a catastrophic flood. And then in that, we coordinate the response. And immediately when an event occurs, people are starting to recover. And there's short-term recovery, there's long-term recovery. And then in the case of Xenia, they continue to recover because there's always those signs of the new built buildings versus the ones that still exist. You can kind of see that path still today through Xenia with the newer track of homes versus all the ones that are still there. And then of course, we work on mitigation techniques and ways for people to build resilience. So we do a lot. We kind of work that whole piece of it from response to consequence management. But the big part of us and our role is dealing with consequence management and helping people return to some type of normalcy, whatever that looks like afterwards. Moving, into tornadoes, tornado season, we do severe weather awareness in the spring. We have the tornado safety drill across the state. But one of the tornadoes that I remember most vividly was Veterans Day weekend. I happened to be in the building, and Santa Claus 2 movie was coming out, and it was in Van Wert, a tornado warning came up. And the very first thing that happened was they said that a theater was hit and it was full for a matinee. Well, of course, it's a Saturday, right? It's in 2002. So long story short, it ended up that, and theaters are kind of not built as shelters. So the person who owned it listened to the warning, was aware of it, and got everyone into the center by the concession stand. It was not a direct hit on that, but we didn't know that for probably an hour, and neither did the county emergency management director. So in Ohio, we have 88 counties, and each county has a county emergency management director who is very well versed. And then, of course, I'm the director of the state agency, and we communicate with all those 88 emergency management directors on all spaces emergency management. When we found out it wasn't directly hit, it was this amazing relief.
Absolutely.
Because you're like, it's a Saturday. People are at a matinee. They're getting ready for the holiday season to kick off, and you knew there were probably a lot of children, which every life matters. But when they're kids, you kind of like, oh no, because they get frightened.
Right.
So those tornadoes are interesting. I'll throw out a couple statistics. In 2022, Ohio had 27 tornadoes confirmed across the state. These storms impacted 25 counties. There were 5 injuries reported, but we didn't have any fatalities. And actually, our last fatality from a tornado in Ohio was in May of 2019, and it was an EF3 tornado that came through Mercer County. This year, as of April 25th, we've already had 23 tornadoes, and we are starting at a very higher pace this year in our tornado, the amount of tornadoes we've seen touch down in Ohio.
Okay. So listen, you said a couple things that I want to circle back and touch on. First of all, you talked about a statewide tornado safety drill. Mm-hmm. So tell us about that. When do you do that? When is that? How does that work?
So it occurs during Severe Weather Awareness Week, which is in March. It's designated. Our media and TV stations across the state are very, very involved and are very aware of that, support that wholeheartedly. The National Weather Service and the Ohio Committee for Severe Weather Awareness puts that out in schools and state agencies and buildings, and we hope that the private sector as well. At 10:50 on a given date for each year, the tornado sirens will go off as a statewide tornado drill, and we ask everyone to participate in that just so people have that awareness, because we don't know if they still do tornado drills like they used to years ago, right? We have cell phones now, we have social media, we have accessibility to a lot of ways to get warnings. And I think some people are like, well, if you have notifications and that kind of stuff, but it is a one day a year where we have a lot of participation for people to practice.
You talked about tornado sirens. I remember when I was a kid, they do those tests. I want to say it was like every Wednesday at noon or something like that where the sirens would go off. Do most communities have those sirens? And if they do, who sets those off? Is it emergency management? Is it the local fire department? Is it the National Weather Service? Talk about how that works a little bit.
So with warning sirens, first of all, I want to make sure that people understand outdoor warning or outdoor tornado sirens are for outdoors. A lot of us can hear them indoors, but they should not be your only method of warning because their intention is to alert folks who are outdoors. It varies who sets those off. So we have power plant counties in the state. So a couple of those counties that they have a lot of sirens because they use those for warnings and drills and testing of power plants. But those same sirens get used for all hazards as well as weather. Each county has some. It varies. It could be a couple to 80, 90 sirens throughout the state. And each day of the week, counties pick that day. So in particular, a county up on Lake Erie, they do Fridays.
Okay.
Here in central Ohio, in Franklin County, ours is Wednesday at noon. And if you live by a tornado siren, you kind of could set your watch to it if you know that.
Right.
So
you talked about the tornado sirens for being outside. I like Gary's story. You're back in the old days. There was really only 2 ways you found out there was a tornado coming. You heard that outdoor siren and you knew the tornado warning, or you just happened to be watching the news and they'd break in and again they'd run like a ticker across the bottom. I don't remember if you remember that. They'd run like a ticker across the bottom with the weather update. Clearly, we are doing a better job in this day and age of leveraging technology. So, again, the story I told about driving home from Lake Erie, Port Clinton area, my phone was going. It was either an Amber Alert or a tornado or something. So I was able to, get that warning. So I think the emergency management folks and the early warning systems have really kind of been upgraded to adjust for technology, so that really we can try to reach people wherever they are. And actually, you've done some good work. I know they're doing some good work in trying to get folks who may be hearing impaired or visually impaired, trying to make sure that they have the warning systems they need as well.
So we do. We continue to work with all sectors. People who, I have an aunt who's in her 80s. She will not give up her flip phone. She just won't do it. And I worry about that. And I worry about how she gets her warning. She said, well, you kids will call me, right? You all call. And we do, but we have so many ways to receive warnings today that sometimes it can be overwhelming.
That's a good
So
point.
part of our messaging is to make sure that people understand what they have readily available. They have their notifications turned on their phone. They're even in our devices now able to separate some warnings from others, right? You can have your weather warnings on. We encourage people to download your favorite TV station's weather app, so or the TV station's app, and in there you can select the notifications. I happen to have a bunch of apps across the state from our different sectors and different TV stations, and at nighttime sometimes I want to turn them off if I get a Northern Ohio or a Cincinnati one, and I tell myself don't turn it off, because there's going to be one of those that alerts you, even if it's an amber, right? That could save your life or your family's.
Right.
So,
Right. So one of the things that we had the opportunity to talk to Gary about beforehand, we would kind of talk about his situation and his experience, but he talked about preparing, and Gary shared the story with us that you just didn't feel like you were prepared, and then one of the issues you had to deal with is the electricity was out for quite some time, and once that sun went down, you had to live by flashlights. So, Sima, from an emergency management and preparing for emergencies point of view, what kind of advice do you have for folks with respect to preparing for, we'll focus on tornadoes because that's what we're talking about, but these types of natural disasters?
So, preparing doesn't have to be difficult. It's actually pretty easy. It's just being aware of what you're used to, right? If you live in the plains or the Midwest, you know that there is a good chance for tornadoes. People on the West Coast plan for wildfires. For us, for tornadoes in particular, notifications and warning, pay attention to that. Pay attention to your weather. And know that if severe weather is coming your way, charge your devices, because that's how we get a lot of warning these days. Have batteries available, flashlights available. We encourage, no matter what the event would be, is that you have 72 hours of water, a gallon a day per person. So if you have a family of 4, you have 4 gallons per day for 3 days. And that is to just for when there's an event or the electricity, those kinds of things aren't working. You want to make sure that you have a plan and you have an understanding of where your children or your parents or where you would meet up after an event. Gary mentioned when everything was tore up, even though it was the next day, it was kind of confusing. And I've been to a couple tornadoes, in particular Blue Ash, and even though damage is very similar, it can be very different. And one of the things I wanted to mention about the Blue Ash tornado is that I walked in and there are these beautiful homes, and one home had like a third of the house sheared off. Things were blown around, pictures were broke, but 2 glasses of wine were still sitting on the table, had never moved. And it's amazing the different things that can happen in these storms. And you need to know how to reconnect with the people who are most important. So you want to make sure, first and foremost, that you have that plan, and that plan of how you reconnect with people and where you would go after an emergency or after an event has happened.
So that I think you make a great point there. I know one of the problems that we have when we have an event like this is people from the outside trying to come into the damaged area. So you got down power lines, you've got debris all over the place. It's actually a pretty dangerous situation. And then you have first responders inside the zone trying to do their work and keep people safe. A lot of times that's complicated by people, understandably, people are curious. They want to see what's going on, but it can cause all kinds of problems. Now, again, is it a different situation if I live outside the zone, but my loved one is in the zone? I'm trying to get to my loved one, So, can you give us some guidance on when these emergencies happen? Or these disasters happen, the importance of letting first responders do their thing, the importance of having a good plan so that you don't have to go in to that danger area.
Yeah, so the plans can be a couple things. The first one is obviously individuals and family, but communities have plans also and how to deal with it. They know how to set up their zones, how to keep people out. Depending on the event, we've had a mass shooting in the state in the last 4 or 5 years. Setting up that crisis communication center where you make a good point, you may be outside of where that event happened, but you could have loved ones inside. Messaging and letting people know, and the first responders on the perimeter being able to direct family members to find out what's happening on the inside is a great thing. And we continue to talk about that and drill and exercise those plans with our communities. So those communities always have those crisis plans on how to set that up, and where a crisis or a family assistance center may be on the outskirts to help you figure out what's going in. So there's all kinds of planning that occurs with our local officials as well as our state officials.
Who sets up those family assistance or reunification? Is it the local county emergency managers? Is it the local fire department? Is the incident commander? Who's in charge of that?
So I think it changes. It can be different in each event. Generally, it's the emergency manager and the emergency management team. But what happens is a command center is set up, and the people in there's an incident commander. So a good bit of time it's the fire chief.
Okay.
But there are times it's law enforcement or a police chief or a sheriff, depending on the event. That is part of that plan that gets executed during an event. So there may be a team that's working setting up reunification centers, setting up fatality management centers, crisis centers. Then there's another part that's working on search and rescue. And they know where those resources are, where they're going, how they're being detailed, what areas they've covered to ensure that we have knocked on everyone's doors.
And some, I think, a piece that we don't talk about, we talk about search and rescue, we talk about the safety aspects of these, but really this is more for public safety folks who may be listening to this. The piece that we just cannot understate enough is the communications piece.
That's right.
And you have got, if your jurisdiction has one of these incidents, you have got to be constantly communicating with the public about where reunification is, where the family assistance is, what the plan is, what you're doing, or otherwise people are going to come down and try to figure out on their own. So again, I know folks who listen to this are in the public safety community. We just cannot stress that enough, and I don't know if you want to speak to that or not.
Yeah, we communication at all levels. It's got to be at the local level. It has to be at the scene. It has to be through the media. It has to be accurate, articulate, and it has to be delivered in a way that everyone can understand it. One of the things that we noticed actually in another event in Northwest Ohio was that we have to pay attention to what our community's makeup is. And that emergency manager or that local incident commander is going to know that. But we had some tornadoes and severe storms up in Northwest Ohio, and there was a pocket of workers that were Japanese. And we didn't have anyone on the team that spoke Japanese. So quickly we had to work, and this was years ago, and we worked with Honda to help and get us engaged immediately with people that we could forward deploy to help these people understand. Because some of them could not, actually a majority of them could not read English, and most of the stuff we put out was in English. Right. Today we're far better.
Right.
We have done assistance centers where we have had handouts, flyers, and paperwork in 8 different languages, and interpreters available to help anyone beyond those 8. We have relationships with communications folks, so that's the first thing. The second thing to remember is if we don't communicate it and communicate the truths and the accuracies of what's going on, someone else will try to communicate it, and then that becomes the second emergency you're dealing with, because you're now trying to clear up what was not accurate, and you're trying to put out true information. Right. And then the third thing that we deal with a lot today is there is a lot of information on social media, and I would recommend that when people are unsure, they verify it.
Right, absolutely. That again, that's the key of the local jurisdiction. Having a either a Facebook page or some kind of platform where they're communicating the most accurate, up-to-date information, so that when somebody does hear something from their friends or from something else on social media, that they can at least bounce that off of the local government site or whoever's in charge with the local response. And again, a lot of times what we have found in some of these emergency responses is some of the information that goes out on the unverified false information that goes out on social media is actually they're foreign actors a lot of times who are putting information out just to cause issues. So that's something that we have to work our way through. And I think you're right that the best way you do that is a clear, concise, and accurate, up-to-date communication plan from the local government. So I think that's great.
So the only thing I would add, Director, and you made me think of this, is that we have to think about all sectors, right? So after or during and after an emergency, there are a lot of anxieties and mental health, and where do I go, and what's happened to my property, and are my kids going to be able to go back to school? So one of the things in the communication plan is we have to think about all sectors. The people who can't help themselves, how do we help them? How do we get people reconnected to their durable medical equipment? And where do they go to do that? Where are shelters set up? Are those shelters pet friendly? And so that's just a few of them, but we have to think the full 360 when we're communicating to make sure that we are giving folks that clear guidance on where they can go to get their assistance.
Right, and I like that 360. You got to think of things that you never would think of. Let's use Gary's example, great example. When you're dealing with recovery from a tornado in Xenia, Ohio, you're not going to be thinking about what are we going to do with all these rats. So it's, there a lot of times in these emergency situations, things pop up that you just would never even expect. So you just got to be prepared for all contingencies. Let's talk very quickly about, we hear F1, F2, F3, F4 tornadoes. What does that mean? And how does EMA work with the National Weather Service in not only putting out information about storms that are coming, but doing damage assessment after a storm comes through?
Yep. So tornado warnings are issued by the National Weather Service. And so when people say, what is an EFS or an EF? It's an Enhanced Fujita Scale. And it's a scale that they use that ranks tornadoes. There are 6 of them. And what's confusing is it starts with EF0 and goes to EF5. So even straight line winds, if they're not a tornado, can be devastating and very damaging. But they classify weak tornadoes as EF zeros or ones, and they have wind speeds of 65 to 110 miles an hour. A strong is an EF2 or an EF3 with wind speeds of 111 to 165 miles an hour. And then the violent storms are EF4s and 5s with wind speeds of 166 to 200 miles an hour. And they can even go higher. It would include the higher ones, but we see the majority of those. We at Ohio Emergency Management have a 24-hour watch office, and that watch office, although it's all hazards, we are really connected nonstop with the National Weather Service. So we're in chat rooms and on phones, monitoring all the different models and things that they're putting out for everything, right? Drought, high winds, extreme heat, which is another one that's coming up. And we're connected with them all the time. In Ohio, we have 5 National Weather Services that have forecasting areas. So we do meetings with the National Weather Service to ensure that we know how to use their tools, how to be connected, and when things are really ramping up, we ramp up the watch office with additional staffing to ensure that we have someone connected with the National Weather Service. When an event occurs, we'll use a tornado, and we know that it's happened. Our very first call is to the community. And it's like, are you okay? What do you need? We're monitoring. While we're doing that, each county has an assigned regional liaison from Ohio Emergency Management, and those regional liaisons live within their designated area. So they'll respond to the counties that need assistance or to the field to start assessing early damage assessment to say this is looking pretty bad. This is a lot of barn damage, still significant for people, but it's different when you have outbuilding and barn damage versus your home. So that is the very first thing. We get these regional folks out to give us boots on the ground. That also includes our law enforcement partners and fire. So we're working with them, we're touching base with them, incident command centers are set up, and we're getting firsthand information live back. While all that's happening, the emergency management space and myself, of course, will make that first call to you. And we coordinate then with our administration, our governor's team, the Department of Transportation, the National Guard, the Highway Patrol are some of the ones that are immediate and almost on every call. Because somewhere along there, we have those public safety needs or we have response needs, and those are the folks that can go. And we're doing coordination calls and ensuring that everyone's on the right same page, that they're working in their channels, they're reaching out to their stakeholders to see what they need and to ensure that the response for this community and in Ohio is swift, efficient, and effective.
Right. So you make a great point. Governor DeWine, a Greene County native, family peripherally experienced, obviously the storm system and the devastation afterwards. And we can't understate how involved he is when we have these types of events going on.
So it's a testament to Governor DeWine. We kind of had to hold him back, right?
Right.
He wanted to go right away.
Yes.
He wanted to be right out there. We're like, well, we should wait till daylight.
Right.
Because there was debris everywhere. We weren't sure the scope and how many homes were there. The storm system, and if I may, I'll talk just a little bit about it. On coordination, I got a call from the Indiana State Emergency Management Director and said, hey, Sima, this is Brian. We generally here in Indiana take the brunt of these storms, but we can't do it this time, and this is building as it's coming toward you. At the same time, my operations administrator and watch office is calling me saying they're issuing like the highest level about the storm, and I'm kind of concerned. It's coming across the state line right now. I was like, oh boy. And it's Monday night of Memorial Day. So Indiana continues to talk to my watch office. The director continues to talk. He said it's building. We are seeing debris on the radar. We're seeing the debris signature. when you see debris signatures on radar, you know there's a lot happening. There are things being blown apart.
Right.
And in Mercer County, the Mercer County EM, they got the first tornado of the system. He had called and said, I'm not leaving. I had to check on my family, my mom and dad. He said, but I'm here, and it is verified this is debris signature. And that's actually where we had a fatality out of that event. Then they started popping. Well, as that one got closer and closer to Dayton, Children's Hospital was starting to make arrangements in Dayton for how they were going to move and where they were going to move folks within the hospital to make sure they were safe into their safe spaces. I did have a gentleman tell me in the aftermath who worked for a fire department. He said, it's the craziest thing. I've never seen it. He said, this tornado was heading directly for Children's Hospital. I mean, you could see it coming. And it was like when it came to 35, it hung a left. Mm-hmm. Tornadoes don't do that.
Right.
They don't go, I'm going to zigzag. And he, to this day, actually, I have goosebumps talking about it, said to me when we were there for the damage assessment, if people are not spiritual, they are now. Mm. Because the folks that were near that saw that, and it kind of veered off and around that. And it is amazing what people remember, how it sticks with you, and how it changes you. And you carry that forever, which then in the recovery comes the mental health pieces.
Right.
And all of those kinds of things.
Right. So, and again, the fact that you had to hold the governor back, that comes from a desire actually to get into those communities and make sure they're okay and make sure they have the resources that they need to cope with the aftermath. Right. And that is, he's incredibly passionate about getting on the ground and being there for the folks in those communities to make sure they're taken care of. So we're going to head towards the finish here with this question. I'm in my house. I have my family. The tornado sirens and my phone is going off that there's a tornado headed towards my house. What do I do to keep my family safe inside my house?
So inside the house, please don't go out. We all want to look at it, right?
Gary Allen.
And be a looky-loo, but we don't want to do that. Know the safest space in your home. If you have a lower level or a basement, that's going to be the place to be. If you don't, get into a center interior room. And try to stay away from all windows and be together in that center because it's going to hit those outer walls first. If you're in a car, I'm going to move to car real quick.
Yes, that's where I was going next. That was going to be question number 2.
All right. Do not take shelter under a bridge or an overpass.
Oh, that's good to know.
It is good to know.
That's good to know because I, for some reason, thought that that's what I would do.
Yeah, no, you don't want to do that. You want to get to somewhere that you can take shelter, or if you have a known shelter. If you cannot get there, we recommend that if you stay in the car, you cover your head and kind of tuck. And if there's nowhere else you can get, if you get out of the car, get into a ditch or a low-lying ravine and kind of flatten out, protecting your head.
Okay. So the question for me always was, do I get out of the car or do I stay in the car? So I mean that's the decision point that you're going to make. And I don't know if there is a right answer or a good answer. I would imagine it depend on what's around you.
Yeah.
So, well, listen, Sima, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us on this important topic. Obviously, it is tornado season. This is part of our Safe and Sound summer safety series, so we're thrilled to have you here. Gary, having lived through a tornado yourself, do you have anything for our listeners with your experience?
Yes, sir. The only thing I would say is really I would reiterate what Sima said is have a plan, and make sure your family knows the plan, what you would do in case, not only at home, but also at work. Make sure you have a plan. You have the resources, emergency plan, which is really important. And I think some people don't take that into consideration because these things pop up on you fast, which, nowadays we have far more notice than we had in 1974. But still, if you have everything together, that's the best way to look at it.
Well, again, we certainly appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come spend some time with us today to share your experience there from 1974. Thank you so much for your service, both in the military and in the patrol. We're so incredibly glad that you and your family lived through this and came through unharmed. And again, this is part of our summer safety series here on Safe and Sound, and we're doing everything we can here in the Department of Public Safety to keep our friends, our families, our communities safe and sound.
The Safe and Sound podcast is recorded by the Ohio Department of Public Safety. Links and more information can be found in this episode's show notes. And for more information on all 9 divisions of the Ohio Department of Public Safety, visit publicsafety.ohio.gov.